There was soft jazz music playing, people laughing everywhere, and glasses of red wine sparkling under the lights. This was the fancy birthday party that happens every year for the famous movie star Jack Nicholson, and his very close friend Diane Keaton was invited as a super important guest. But only a few days after this party, Hollywood, the place where movies are made, got some really sad and shocking news. Diane Keaton had died suddenly at her house. She was 79 years old. Right after that, newspapers printed a scary headline that said, "Jack Nicholson is being looked at by the police." When police officers followed the clues and hints, they found some really surprising things. There was a broken wine glass spilled all over the outdoor terrace area. There was proof of a serious, intense conversation that happened. And there were letters that had the letter J written on them. So, what really happened at that birthday party? And what was Jack Nicholson so worried and obsessed about that he felt he had to stop Diane no matter what? Jack and Diane first met each other one afternoon back in 1978. It was in a loud and busy room where they were making the movie called Reds. At that time, Diane Keaton had just become super famous because of her movie Annie Hall. Meanwhile, Jack Nicholson was already known as a movie legend, someone everyone knew and respected. Diane walked into the room holding her script, the paper with all her lines. Her hair was a little bit messy and her voice sounded a tiny bit shaky because she had a cold. Jack was sitting in the corner of the room and he looked at her over his dark sunglasses. He asked her, "Are you the troublemaker who's keeping Warren Beatty awake at night?" Diane looked up at him and smiled with confidence. She said, "If that's true, then you should probably stay far away from me." Everyone in the whole room started laughing. But Jack didn't laugh. He just kept looking at her very carefully and intensely. He said, "No need to stay away. I don't have any problems with women." And then they both burst out laughing together. In that exact moment, when their eyes met and locked on each other, something special sparked between them. It wasn't exactly love, and it wasn't exactly desire or attraction. But it was a connection that couldn't be denied, like they had somehow met somewhere before in another life, in another time. That's how their relationship started, with a playful, clever, and witty joke. All through the 1980s, the whole decade, they stayed in touch with each other. They would sometimes show up together at art shows and exhibitions. Diane would often call Jack the charming troublemaker, someone who causes problems but in a cute way. And Jack called her the obsession in the shape of a woman, meaning she was something he couldn't stop thinking about. In 2003, something brought them together once more. They both acted in a popular romantic movie called Something's Gotta Give. From the very first time they sat down to read the script together, there was a weird and strange energy running between them. When their eyes would meet and look at each other, the air in the room seemed to completely freeze. Every single line they said felt truly warm and real. Every time they touched each other, the camera would stay on them for an extra second longer than normal. One person who worked on the crew of the movie told this story. Even when the director would yell "cut" to stop filming, Jack didn't stop staring and looking at Diane, and Diane would have this teasing, playful smile on her face. What was their relationship really like in real life? Nobody was completely sure or certain, but everyone could see that their special bond was very clear and obvious. After they finished filming every scene, Diane would often walk out onto the balcony to get some air, and Jack would always be right there behind her, following her. One magazine even wrote and claimed that Jack would call Diane every single night right before going to bed. He just wanted to hear her voice saying good night to him. Diane herself often said that Jack Nicholson was one of the only people in the entire world who made her feel truly comfortable and at ease. Many years went by, and they kept in contact with each other. They would call each other best friends. Then one day in October, something big happened. Diane Keaton went to Jack Nicholson's birthday party. According to several different sources and people who were there, Jack and Diane had a private conversation on the rooftop of the house. This conversation lasted for over 20 minutes, more than a third of an hour. Just a few days after that party, Hollywood woke up to news that felt like an earthquake, something that shook everyone. Diane Keaton was found dead all of a sudden at her home. Within 72 hours, that's 3 whole days, the news media exploded with a headline that said, Jack Nicholson called in by police for questioning after Diane Keaton's death. News reporters and photographers swarmed around the gates of Nicholson's huge mansion in Beverly Hills, a fancy area where rich people live. Camera shutters clicked over and over again, making clicking sounds. Camera flashes burst everywhere like lightning bolts. The Los Angeles police quickly made a statement and said, "There are no signs of foul play," meaning no signs that someone hurt her on purpose. But then they added a confusing and unclear line that said, "But we need to make clear and understand the order of events that happened before Ms. Keaton died." This one sentence was enough to turn all of Hollywood into a temporary scene where everyone was trying to solve a mystery and investigate what happened. People's opinions were split and divided. Fans were sad and mourning, and they shared old photos of Diane on the internet. Cheap gossip newspapers screamed with big headlines on their front pages, "Jack Nicholson, the last person to see Diane Keaton alive." Just a few hours later, Jack Nicholson showed up at the police station. He came all by himself without any bodyguards to protect him or a lawyer to help him. He was wearing a dark suit and sunglasses. His face looked really gloomy and sad. His chin was tucked down slightly. The muscles in his face were tight and tense, which made his deep wrinkles show more than they ever had before. He walked straight ahead, quietly opened the door, and disappeared behind the heavy steel gate. All he left behind were people whispering and the sounds of cameras clicking. The room where they questioned people at the West LA Police station felt thick and heavy with tension. You could feel how serious and uncomfortable it was. A detective asked in a pointed and direct way, "Can you tell us exactly what happened that night?" Jack leaned back in his chair, took off his dark glasses, and said with a feeling of helplessness, like he felt defeated, "It was just a normal, regular party. There were friends, wine, and a few old songs playing. Diane left before midnight, before 12 o'clock at night. But the investigation file, all the papers and notes the police had, was not that simple at all. The crime scene report, the official paper about what they found, showed that there were no security cameras working on the rooftop area. When the police asked questions about this, Jack Nicholson only sighed and said, "I don't know. Maybe it was a technical glitch. Maybe something broke or stopped working. Everything in that house is really old." It seemed like a perfect coincidence, but so perfect that it seemed suspicious and made people wonder. Meanwhile, the autopsy report for Diane Keaton was released to the public. An autopsy is when doctors examine a dead body to find out how someone died. It said there were no signs of violence or fighting, but it did show the presence of sedatives in her body. Sedatives are drugs that make you sleepy and calm. This raised a big question. Did Diane take these drugs before she arrived at the party? Or did she take them after she left Jack Nicholson's mansion? The suspicion and doubt got even worse and escalated when a secret source revealed something new. A witness, someone who saw what happened, remembered that Jack Nicholson personally poured Diane Keaton a glass of red wine with his own hands. This happened just before they both left the rooftop together. And only a few minutes after that, a wine glass was found spilled near the exact spot where the two of them were standing. But this glass was immediately cleaned up by a server, a person who serves food and drinks, before the police even arrived at the scene. Right away, the police demanded and requested all the wine that was left over from that bottle. They wanted to test it in a lab. They also asked for detailed statements, written or spoken explanations, from every single person who attended the party. A forensic technical team, special police scientists, was instantly sent out to examine and look at glasses, cups, and any fingerprints that might be left behind. It was at this exact point that they discovered and uncovered a much bigger issue and problem. The two of them, Jack and Diane, had a heated argument on the balcony. A heated argument means a really intense fight with loud voices. An anonymous server, someone whose name wasn't given, gave testimony and said that he heard Diane's voice suddenly get louder and rise up. This was mixed in with Jack trying to calm her down and reassure her. Jack was saying things like, "You don't understand me, Diane." Then there came the loud scraping sound of a chair being moved. After that, there was complete silence that lasted for over a whole minute. When the police questioned Jack Nicholson about this argument and fight, he did not try to avoid the question or evade it. He sat there silently for a few seconds, looking directly and straight at the investigator, the police detective. His voice was full of tiredness and fatigue when he spoke. He said, "I just wanted to help her get away from Al Pacino." After pausing for a moment, Jack continued talking and said, "She called me many, many times. They had a history together. They used to date. But lately, Diane told me that he was showing up again. He was sending her letters and calling her in the middle of the night when she was trying to sleep. She was scared and afraid, but she didn't want to make a big fuss about it or cause drama." Jack took a deep breath. His eyes behind the dark sunglasses narrowed slightly with emotion. You could tell he was feeling a lot. He said, "I overstepped. I went too far and crossed a line. I told her that she had to cut him off completely. I said she needed to leave the city immediately and right away. She got extremely angry when she heard me say that. She stood up from her chair, looked me straight in the face with her eyes locked on mine, and shouted at me." Jack tried to swallow, but his throat felt tight and constricted. He continued, "She told me to stay out of other people's business. She called me an old autocratic fool. Autocratic means controlling and bossy. She said that this was exactly why she didn't want to tell me about her problems in the first place." Then the emotion suddenly broke loose and came pouring out. Jack Nicholson slumped forward, bending over. His hands were shaking and trembling as he covered his face with them. He was crying, but there was no sound. Only heavy sobs that shook and vibrated through the cold room. Through his tears, he said, I couldn't protect her. I pushed her away with my words and actions. And now she's dead and gone forever. But I swear on everything, I didn't hurt her. I just wanted to protect Diane and keep her safe." This statement and explanation from Jack not only failed to resolve and solve the case, but it actually opened up a new and dangerous line of investigation. Now the police were pulling in another legendary and famous figure, Al Pacino, another super-famous actor. The tragedy and sad situation got even deeper as the biggest question was raised and asked, did Jack Nicholson truly just want to protect Diane like he claimed and said? The real truth is that Jack and Diane's past together was not just a simple professional friendship between co-workers. After they made the movie Reds together, Jack had been madly in love with Diane. It was a fierce love, very strong and intense. Yet at the same time it was desperate and pleading. It was like he was begging for her love. And the person who drove Jack the most insane and crazy was Al Pacino. Al Pacino was Diane's long-term complicated ex-lover. Ex means former, someone she used to date. But things and events didn't stop there. During the investigation, the police found a note written in Diane Keaton's personal diary. A diary is like a journal where you write your private thoughts. The note said, "Don't disgust me, Jack." That one sentence immediately caused a huge stir and got everyone talking. This was because it strangely and weirdly matched a famous remark that Jack Nicholson once talked about in an interview back in 2003. He had said, "She often looks at me, frowns at me, and says, 'You're disgusting.' Then we both burst out laughing together." At the time when he first said this, the public and regular people saw it as just a private joke between two good friends. But after Diane's death, everything took on a different color and meaning. People started asking, was this actually a warning? Was she trying to tell him to back off? According to information that was found in her diary, Jack, with his obsessive, unrequited love disguised and hidden as friendship, had tried to pursue Diane and win her heart multiple times over the years. Unrequited love means loving someone who doesn't love you back. But Diane valued her peace and quiet. She didn't want to stir up the past or bring back old drama. So she had repeatedly refused him again and again. Even though she treasured their relationship and thought it was special, she did not want to get involved in all the complexity and complicated mess that Jack brought with him. The suspicion and doubt grew even more when a close friend of Diane Keaton revealed and shared that Diane had received dozens and dozens of letters from Jack Nicholson over the years, but she never opened a single one of them. She kept them all sealed. But Jack would not accept the boundaries that Diane tried to set up. He wouldn't respect her limits. The letters that were seized and taken by the police were filled from top to bottom with pleading, begging, and resentment, anger, and bitterness. One letter said, "Diane, please stop avoiding me. I don't want you to face this situation alone." The next letter read, "Don't love Al Pacino anymore. He's a troublemaker who will only cause you problems." This whole relationship had become a source of extreme stress for Diane. It was weighing on her mind constantly. Throughout her final months before she died, she lived in complete torment, extreme suffering and pain. On one hand, she needed Jack. He was the soulmate who understood her deepest self, the parts of her that nobody else could see or understand. On the other hand, she had to put up a steel wall to protect herself against the unrequited affection and love from her colleague, co-worker. Her exhaustion and tiredness was very evident and clear in her diary. She wrote, "No room to breathe anymore. Jay, that's what she called Jack, is tearing me apart. I just want some peace and quiet." She constantly and always suffered from insomnia, not being able to sleep at night. She had to rely on sedatives, sleeping pills, to help her rest. She tried to cancel all appointments and meetings with Jack, but things didn't end there. The story continued. While searching through her home in Brentwood, a nice neighborhood in Los Angeles, the police found a folder of unsealed handwritten letters in Keaton's desk drawer. All of these letters were signed with the name Jay, Jack's nickname. These letters were never sent out to anyone, but fresh ink traces suggested and showed that they were written just days before, only a few days before the fateful birthday party that changed everything. One police officer revealed to the press, and his voice was full of sympathy and sadness. He said, "The handwriting looks shaky and unsteady, but the emotion in the words is very clear. These were love letters, letters about loving someone. But the person they were meant for never dared to open them and read them." From that moment on, the case file shifted and changed entirely. It went in a completely different direction. Between the unfinished sentences that trailed off, the unsealed white envelopes that were never mailed, and Diane's anger and fury on the rooftop that night, the tragedy began to unfold and reveal itself piece by piece. This was the pain of a woman who had been pushed to her absolute limit. She was trapped and stuck between the two men she cared about the most in her life. The moment Jack stepped out of the hallway of the Los Angeles Police Department building, a flood of camera lenses immediately exploded all around him. The clicking sounds of cameras, the shouting of reporters, and the pressing questions rushed in from all directions. Reporters were yelling, "Were you really the last person to see Diane Keaton alive, Jack? Did an argument happen between you two at your birthday party? Police say they found a personal item of yours at the scene where she died. How do you explain that?" Jack stopped walking and stood still. He was squinting his eyes because of the dazzling and bright camera flashes all around him. He tried his best to remain composed and calm, but his face betrayed everything. It showed exactly how he felt. He had deep, dark circles under his eyes. His hair was messy and all over the place, and his hands were trembling and shaking slightly. He was no longer the witty gentleman that people knew and loved. Standing before this chaotic and crazy crowd, Jack was just a man who was struggling and fighting with the worst nightmare of his entire life. A reporter from the Los Angeles Times newspaper stepped forward closer to him. The reporter asked, "Jack, did you love Diane Keaton? Were you in love with her?" Jack stared directly at the person who asked the question. His lips moved like he was trying to speak, but no words came out of his mouth at first. Finally, after a long pause, he just muttered in a hoarse and rough voice, "Get the hell out of the way." His voice was angry and tired at the same time. As Jack Nicholson slowly walked through the corridor and hallway, hundreds of camera lenses outside the police station gate were aimed straight at him like weapons. The clicking sounds and the flashing lights surrounded this solitary man. Solitary means alone, like a hailstorm, like frozen rain pelting down on him. And then, right before he reached the heavy steel threshold, the doorway, something unexpected happened that nobody saw coming. Jack stopped in his tracks. He raised a trembling and shaking hand to push back his messy gray hair. In the very next second, a single tear was seen rolling down his deeply etched cheek. It traced along the lines that had been worn into his face by time and age. That tear was not the remorse of a criminal feeling sorry for a crime. Instead, it was the shattering grief of a friend who had lost someone dear to him. He tried to keep walking forward, but then his shoulder slumped down slightly. An unconcealable sob escaped from his mouth, a sob he couldn't hide or hold back. He was crying real tears. Jack Nicholson, the man who was known for fearing nothing and no one, collapsed and broke down before thousands of camera lenses, before millions of watchful eyes around the world. The camera flashes continued to erupt and burst all around him, capturing and taking pictures of the most tragic and devastated moment in the life of a legend. It was the exact moment when Jack was no longer Jack Nicholson, the movie star. He was just an old man being tormented and tortured by an unspeakable secret, something he couldn't talk about, and he was filled with regret about not being able to protect her when she needed him. Keaton's funeral was held privately, meaning only certain people could come, at an old church in the Brentwood neighborhood. Jack Nicholson arrived late to the service. He came alone, all by himself. He was wearing a classic black suit, which is what people wear to funerals. But this time, he wasn't wearing his usual sunglasses. This revealed his deeply sunken eyes that looked hollow and empty. As Jack walked through the gate of the church, the whispers of people talking and the clicks of cameras noticeably quieted down and subsided. They were replaced by heavy silence, the kind of silence that feels thick and hard to breathe in. All eyes turned to look at him, and the people who attended started to whisper to each other quietly. He stepped inside the church and stood quietly in the back row, far away from everyone else. No one dared to approach him or walk up to him, and he did not seek comfort from anyone. He didn't try to find someone to make him feel better. Throughout the entire funeral service, Jack Nicholson neither cried out loud nor moved in any abrupt or sudden way. He just stared intensely and deeply at the casket, the box that holds the body. The casket was covered with Diane's favorite white hydrangeas, a type of pretty flower. His complete stillness and lack of movement was more frightening and scary than a sob or cry would have been. It was the freezing, the complete stopping of a pain that was too immense and huge to express. It was a repression so haunting that it stayed with you. He was holding everything inside. During the eulogy, the speech where someone talks about the person who died, an old friend stood up and mentioned the special friendship between Diane and Jack. When this happened, you could feel the tension in the room increase and get stronger. When everyone was invited to come up for the final viewing, to see the body one last time, Jack was the very last person to step up to the casket. He placed a single white rose on top of the casket, just one flower. Then he bent down low, getting close, and whispered something that no one else could hear. His words were private and secret. Some people said later that they thought he uttered the words, "Al the bastard." Bastard is a mean word. Other people claimed that he mumbled an apology, saying he was sorry. When he turned back around to leave, his face was pale as wax, completely white and drained of color. He walked out of the church and headed straight for his car without shaking anyone's hand, without saying a word of farewell or goodbye to anyone. The immense pressure from the media, TV, newspapers, internet, and the public, regular people, was crushing him. After the news broke and spread everywhere, Jack Nicholson's name was blanketed across all social media websites, entertainment news sites, and morning talk shows on TV. Millions and millions of people scrolled past the classic photo of him and Diane Keaton in Something's Gotta Give. But now that beautiful photo was framed by allegations, accusations, and mystery, unanswered questions. On one side, Jack's loyal fans, people who loved him and supported him, fiercely protested and defended him. They said things like, he would never hurt Diane. They were best friends. He loved her. On the other side, the rest of the public was convinced and sure that something murky and dark was being concealed and hidden. Internet forums, places where people talk online, were flooded and filled with chilling analyses, scary explanations about certain things. The broken camera footage on the night of the party that didn't work, the phrase, "You're disgusting," that was repeated over and over in Diane's diary, and especially the red wine glass that was cleaned up immediately right after Diane left the rooftop. Meanwhile, some other newspapers adopted and took on a calmer tone. But their words were equally ironic, meaning they said things in a sarcastic way. They wrote things like, an unnamed relationship, a private conversation, a sudden death, and now Hollywood is frantically wondering and asking, how much do we truly know about Jack and Diane's friendship? 2 whole days after the news spread everywhere, Jack Nicholson's representative, the person who speaks for him, was forced to break the silence. They had to say something. They held a brief press conference, a meeting with reporters. The representative said, there is nothing suspicious here. Jack is grief-stricken, extremely sad about Diane's death, but he will cooperate if the police ask him to. He considered Diane to be a part of his life. She was that important to him. However, the press did not believe in this calmness at all. They didn't buy it. A reporter from the Globe newspaper asserted and claimed, he has been summoned for a second time. This time, the police want to clarify the inconsistencies in his initial statement. Inconsistencies means things that don't match up or make sense. They're not just asking for more details anymore. The situation spiraled out of control. It got worse and worse. International news agencies from other countries joined the fray, joined in the fight. Psychologists, people who study the mind, went on TV to debate and argue about the complex friendship between these 2 actors. On Twitter, the hashtag #NarJusticeForDiane immediately climbed and rose to the global top 1, the #1 trending topic in the whole world. A behind-the-scenes video clip showing Diane looking at Jack with a cold stare during an old interview suddenly became evidence. This clip was shared millions and millions of times by people. In the middle of this media storm, all the crazy news coverage, Jack Nicholson completely disappeared from public view. There was no press conference where he spoke to reporters. There was no explanation given. All that anyone could see was the closed gate of his mansion on Mulholland Drive, a famous street where celebrities live. A close source, someone who knew him personally, revealed and said, he couldn't bear the sight of Diane's coffin. What they said to each other that night, only they know. But I think his torment and suffering is unbearable. It's too much for him to handle. Newspapers began using heavier and more serious words to describe him. They used words like collapsed, panic, and obsessed. Just as the public discussion began to settle down and calm down, the police surprisingly came back with an additional search warrant, a legal paper that lets them search a place. A few hours later, the West LA police sealed the room where the birthday party took place. They put tape around it so nobody could go in. Immediately, all the news agencies ran synchronized headlines. They all said the same thing at the same time. Jack Nicholson's party room sealed. Broken joint photo reveals mysterious relationship. On CNN, a big news channel, a veteran commentator, someone who explains the news and has done it for many years, remarked and said, this is no longer just a story about 2 actors. This is a story about the fine line between love, guilt, and fame. And that line was erased and disappeared that night at the party. The pressure weighed heavily on Jack Nicholson like a huge weight crushing down on him. People who had worked with him in the past revealed that Jack was suffering from almost constant insomnia. He couldn't sleep almost every single night. An old friend said, he once told me something personal. He said, I thought she was the best part of my life and I couldn't keep her safe. I failed her. 3 weeks after Diane Keaton's death, Los Angeles was still unsettled. People were still upset and confused. One evening, as the flashes of reporters' cameras still flickered and blinked outside his gate, a figure was seen standing silently in the courtyard of his mansion. It was a man with gray hair, wearing a dark robe and holding a glass of red wine in his hand. No one dared to approach him or get close. But one photographer managed to capture the moment in a picture. The black and white photo showed the silhouette, the dark outline, of a legend sinking into the darkness. He was gazing off into the distance as if he was talking to someone who no longer existed in this world. This photo became the final testament to his unspoken torment, proof of the suffering he couldn't put into words. When all the crowds had finally left, when the media noise finally died down and became quiet, only one man remained. He was standing in his large house, completely lost in his own past, stuck in memories. What remains and stays after the lights fade and go dark? In the middle of this whole storm, Jack Nicholson maintained absolute silence. Complete silence. He neither confirmed anything nor denied anything. He didn't say yes or no to any accusations. Jack's silence was not an act of innocence, being not guilty. It also wasn't an act of guilt, being guilty and responsible. It was a refusal to communicate with the shattered world around him, a world that was broken into pieces. A long-time close friend of his, one of the rare and few people still allowed into the Mulholland Drive mansion, revealed a harsh quote to a magazine. The friend said, "He might not have done anything wrong legally, according to the law, but he knows deep down what really happened that night. And that's what's killing him more than anything else, the knowledge of what happened." Jack Nicholson's spotlight had gone out. His time in the bright lights of fame was over. All that remained was the shadow of torment and suffering. Here was a legend who was agonizing over a truth. It was a truth he could not tell, or maybe dared not utter and speak out loud. The case remains open. It's not closed or solved yet. But the verdict of conscience for Jack Nicholson began the moment Diane Keaton left that rooftop. A verdict of conscience means the judgment he made in his own mind about himself. While the police were still meticulously and carefully searching for every single piece of information, the film industry began re-examining their past, looking back at their history together. The two of them were icons of 1970s Hollywood. They were symbols and representatives of that time period. They shared peaks, high points, and valleys, low points together. They shared the loneliness that only celebrities and famous people can understand. Their friendship was not without cracks and problems. On the set of Something's Gotta Give, the place where they filmed the movie, people witnessed them arguing fiercely with each other. Then they would burst into laughter. Then they would fall silent again and not talk. Perhaps that relationship, like all Hollywood scripts, movie stories, was never simply pure friendship. It was always more complicated than that. A veteran critic, someone who reviews and judges movies and has done it for many years, wrote in Variety magazine, a famous Hollywood magazine, "If Diane Keaton was the soul of sincerity, being honest and genuine, then Jack Nicholson was the embodiment of instinct, acting on feelings without thinking. When those two touched and came together, they either created magic or caused tragedy." That quote now feels like a belated omen, a warning that came too late, while the police have not released any conclusive evidence, final proof that solves everything. The media continues to excavate and dig up every single detail of their private lives. They looked at everything from the personal letters they exchanged back in the 1980s to old interviews where Jack once said, "Diane understands me in a way that no one else does." Perhaps that is exactly why people continue to ask these questions. Was Diane Keaton's death truly accidental? Or was it the final act of a relationship that was burned and destroyed by emotion, regret, and unspoken words that were never said out loud? Diane's close friend, actress Goldie Hawn, another famous actress, once gave a brief but haunting interview, an interview that stays with you and makes you think. She said, "Diane once told me something. She said, if anyone could make me cry and laugh at the exact same time, it was only Jack." That quote now rings like a sad prophecy, a prediction of something sad that was going to happen. And Jack, who once stood before thousands and thousands of audiences with a proud smile on his face, now lives within thick walls and deep darkness. He's trapped in his own home, in his own sadness. It is said that every single night he still plays old film clips on his TV, recordings of their old movies. He reads scripts from Something's Gotta Give and The Witches of Eastwick, all the movies and places featuring his old friend. He talks to the screen as if she's still there and alive. Sometimes he fondly scolds the screen, talking like he's giving her a hard time but in a loving way. Sometimes he laughs at the memories. Then he falls silent for a long, long time and doesn't say anything at all. On his table, there are unfinished scripts gathering dust next to a half-empty glass of red wine. The dust is building up because he hasn't touched them in so long. Some people say that he tried to return to the movie set multiple times. He wanted to act again. But each and every time he stood before the camera, ready to perform, he would just walk away. People heard him whispering under his breath, "Without her, there's nothing left to act for. There's no reason to do this anymore." Hollywood has never truly been the land of light like people think it is. It is actually a place that knows how to control light and use it to tell a story. There in Hollywood, the truth is not concealed or completely hidden. Instead, it is embellished, made fancier, edited, changed, and cut, and sold as a lavish dream called the American Dream. Every single moment on the silver screen, the movie screen. From a fleeting glance that lasts only a second to a falling tear, rolling down a cheek, is meticulously calculated and planned down to every single breath the actor takes. Actors learn to cry according to the script. They learn to cry on command. They learn to smile at exactly the right angle for the camera. And they wear loneliness like it's a fashion accessory, like it's just another piece of clothing or jewelry. On the red carpet, where celebrities walk at fancy events, they are no longer flesh and blood people, real human beings. Instead, they become products that have been polished and perfected by millions of dollars of promotion and advertising. Each camera flash is like a part of their soul being ripped out and torn away. It's exchanged and traded for a moment of immortality on a magazine cover, being famous forever in a picture. The clicking sound of cameras is not applause or clapping. Instead, it's like a countdown to a slow burn. The dazzling fame only exists and stays alive as long as they are willing to let it consume them and eat them up.